All righty, we can go ahead and get started. Let's hear from the virtual folks first. Let's see. So, breakout room 1 virtually.
Yeah, one was myself and Stacy. I can go ahead and screen share our reflections. We had a lot of really great, vibrant conversation. Some of our major takeaways in terms of what sort of entity might operate in LPG. It sounds like a hybrid approach was really desired by our group. So some combination of government and university, nonprofit, commercial, some sort of blended, flexible hybrid model. There was a lot of thought about the process for applying to use an LPG should be streamlined and not overburdened by paperwork or bureaucracy. The more that you can minimize the amount of effort and time to actually utilize an LPG, the easier it is for people to focus on the innovation that they're trying to have. This was a thought that was spurred out of yesterday's breakouts, but sort of continued into today, but locality scale and level of fidelity or level of lunar representation as drivers for who operates an LPG or how they're operated. Insurance models came up a lot. What are the policies for when, damage to facilities occurs, because these are, facilities for testing. How does that work? Who are the folks that manage those insurance policies? How do people get connected and know that they exist? All of that. We also mentioned sort of if you've ever been to a WeWork or a co-working space, the thought where, not only are these test facilities, but, folks will be investing a large amount of time and effort and travel and accommodations costs to be able to leverage an LPG. So, is there availability for folks to maybe have lab spaces or sort of mechanic shops, if you will, where they can fine tune or tweak or swap out hardware to conduct iterative testing, as well as, like we're having a hybrid meeting right now, hybrid meeting spaces, whether those are short-term or long-term, whether it's a conference or just a huddle with your team that's not necessarily on site, so that you can report out the results of your testing and maybe tweak your designs. So that you aren't inherently, forced to just stop and go back to your organization once your test is complete, but that you can build on it and make adjustments and support that sort of iterative development. And there was a note that this would be especially helpful for smaller organizations or smaller businesses that don't have the availability to, front those upfront costs to develop their own facility like this. Just another, creative thought that came out was, maybe it's not necessarily government, university, commercial, but if you've seen Kickstarter, or I've named some organizations here like Fractional, Honeycomb, or AngelList syndicates, where individuals who are not accredited investors can invest, anywhere as low as $1,000 up to $100,000 of their own funds to co-own or co-operate, or to pool funds into support of a local business. Is that an option here? It's usually for things like local restaurants and, things in your community, but is that a potential option for ownership and funding of LPGs? In terms of things that folks are wondering about, standards and comparison or consistency across facilities to ensure fidelity no matter where you go for an LPG, so that reproducibility. Lowering the barriers to access, minimizing the wait time required to be able to use an LPG. And folks are wondering if future LSIC workshops or activities could address lunar surface fluid support infrastructure like tankers, pipelines, couplers, and storage, just because fluids weren't as discussed in terms of logistics at this workshop. And Stacy, if you have any other thoughts, feel free to jump on the mic.
Stacy did a thumbs down.
Oh, good. It
was
no.
Pretty
Awesome.
good. Thanks.
We can pass it on to room 2, Kristen and James.
That would be James. Okay. Well, let's see if he wants to talk next. So based on the pros and cons that we identified for the different types of facility ownership and management schemes, we came up with, we need a variety of different schemes because the access that could be provided to each different type of customer is different. So a variety of management schemes and a variety of facilities with different fidelity levels. Everyone thought that there should be entry criteria for when you can use a Lunar Proving Ground. However, at the same time, they want to make sure that the amount of red tape that you have to get through to access a Lunar Proving Ground is commensurate with the level of fidelity of the testing that you're doing. So that was one takeaway. Someone suggested using the NACA model. This is a government testing model whereby if you are participating in a test and you, with others participating, doing similar testing, the results of that data, the detailed results, would be shared amongst yourself and all of the other participants doing the similar kind of testing. In exchange for that, you get very low cost or free access to the facility for testing. If you're a member of the general public not participating, you would have access to summary results. So you're trading free facilities for data. And finally, the group felt that it's opaque on what facilities currently exist for Lunar Proving Grounds, and perhaps there should be an effort to discuss with the ownership of the facilities what are their requirements and what testing they can do and compile it somewhere where everyone can see it. And finally, for just general conference feedback, the group would like to hear more from customers on what their needs are. James, do you have anything to add?
Nope, you covered it very well. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Group 2 is the best group.
Virtual group 3.
There we go. Hey everyone, my name is Sean Young. I am with the Power Focus Group, and I was in breakout room 3. And I see that Lindsay is sharing our Miro board up there. Some basic takeaways. Any proving ground is going to require a blend of both hardware and digital twin architectures to cover the breadth of things that need to be tested. But there is also a question of how much do you want to test physically, and how to balance that with the amount of funding you actually have, and how much robustness you want in your testing in your network of Lunar Proving Grounds. As far as ownership of LPGs, up there were a number of different types of organizations, and we were thinking that there might be a difference in risk posture between each of those different types of organizations, and so you might split things by either TRL that you're trying to get to, and that type of thing. And it might also be down to different to the specificity of things you're trying to test as well. Like you might have a very general LPG, but you might need more specific things for very specific tasks. And another thing that came up was sort of an oversight body, not only for dealing with things like IP issues at the LPGs, but just for general safety things, as well as for the the lunar surface in general, just trying to regularize things and make sure that there is a body there to settle disputes and that kind of thing. Lindsay, did I miss anything super huge?
No, I think that covered it.
Thank you, everyone.
We had a really great discussion. Thank you to everybody who participated.
Awesome, thank you. Virtual group 4.
Hi, this is Michael Nord. I don't want to say I ran group 4. I was there for group 4. We had lots of great, let me share my screen actually. So there we go. Yeah, our group, I think that we, every single one of these questions, we were able to come up with great arguments in both directions. That seems to have been the consensus, was that we couldn't come to consensus on a lot of it. Yeah, there was a lot of discussion on, for example, should this be a small test facilities that are in a consortium, or should this be, a single large test facility? The smaller test facility idea means that there's a geographic diversity, which means political diversity. It means that it's, the sites are going to be, that there's going to be less interference. If someone's testing at one, they're not going to be interfering with other sites, whereas a larger site could have those problems. And of course, there's then if you have a larger site, you're going to have probably more, perhaps different governments, different companies, and then you're going to run into more ITAR or security or IP sorts of situations. When it came to digital engineering tools, everybody of course said yes, right? We want those. We want VR, we want digital twinning. But there was some concern, of course, that in a profit motive situation, that the ability to only test digitally, it can be seductive, and you might want to just skip the actual physical testing and go straight to launch, which is an approach and probably will happen, but it is. Believe me, as someone who's developed many models over my lifetime, I know that it's easy to fall in love with your model and forget that you have to test it against reality eventually. What are some of the programmatic pathways and barriers? And I think I've heard some other people say is, everybody wants everything, but they also want no red tape. So we talked a lot about standards. I think maybe one of the biggest takeaways out of this, and actually one of the big takeaways that came out of Space Resources Roundtable last month also, was this question of standards. If you do have a single large lunar proving ground, you can run the risk of becoming the de facto standards agency. Whatever power and communications you're using at that proving ground are what people need to conform to, which might be a good way to get people to conform to standards, but you better have thought those standards out very carefully then. So who, is this, who owns this? I don't think NASA wants to be a standards agency. NASA, if I'm speaking for you and I'm wrong, please let me know. But yeah, we certainly are going to have to work with ISO or AIAA or other standards agencies there. When it came to legal and liability, I don't think there was a lot of concern. There's lots of testing facilities in the world, and they seem to manage these. Should it have government programmatic support? I think we are going to come, this is always the chicken and egg problem. And I think that we came down to more or less there's going to have to be. We'll all, of course, hope that this is a for-profit thing someday, but in the near term, probably not. Let's see, where else do we want to? Yep, and then when it came down to industry and buy-in partnerships, it's, I think everybody wants that to be a future, and maybe that will be the future in the shorter term. But we think, some sort of percentage investment or data sharing agreements are interesting, but, are certainly not how things like this tend to be run today. So I think those were the major takeaways from 4.
Awesome, thank you. All right, virtual group 5. There were only 5, right, virtually? Is that right?
Yes.
All right, great.
Hi, Andrew Gerger for Group 5 there. So we had a small group, but we talked quite a bit about all these little these questions that popped up there, and similar to yesterday, I think we came out with more thoughts and questions than we did potential direction or answers. But let's go ahead and touch on a few of these. One of the takeaways, industry can do many things that government and universities can't. So a dedicated commerciality facility will be more flexible than either. Hold that thought. We're going to talk more about that in the next couple of minutes. And for simplistic low to no hazard LPG activities, government management is likely not required. But for when you get to testing of hazardous or dangerous activities such as nuclear and human, then I think we all agree that there's going to be some level of oversight that's necessary at that point. More on the commercial facilities have likely worked through a lot of these topics and discussions, and so one of the roundtables or reach out should be just to discuss with them, see how they handled it when they first started up their facility. It may give us a good stepping stone in the right direction. And then more of the pondering, wondering things. Recognition of the customer wants and needs, and have a government minimum standard for approval of activities, right? And so it kind of shakes that tree a little bit more about what kind of oversight and standards are necessary. But that's what I say. Go back to that original one with the hazards. And then to what degree do we really need large lights and landscape type of LPGs versus dirty vacuum chamber type of LPGs? And I think we couldn't put our finger on the answer to that in terms of what the community is wanting at this point in terms of all those. So we put together a little bit of a timeline associated with that, and from both big to small, but then we were thinking about it, the closer you get to actually moon level utilization, the smaller the LPG is likely going to become, due to needing vacuum, needing plasma, needing all these facilities that get smaller and smaller. So so usually we're going to probably start big and then work small. So it was an interesting discussion. That's what I have.
Awesome, thank you. All right, let's go to the in-person groups. Can we do number 1?
All right. I'm Sean Bedford for Group 1, and I would invite you all to kneel and tremble before the all-powerful Group 1, the greatest and best group in the known universe. So approaching this, I think we approached this initially from a kind of utopian idea of it would be great to have this wonderful one-size-fits-all controlled environment where we can do everything that we want to do so that we're all working from the same page. As a practical reality, that's not feasible. And so I think, and also in not just in terms of what is sort of feasible technically, but also from a funding perspective, there's a lot of difficulty to get there. However, there is a possibility to do something like that in the virtual realm, to have a sort of shared virtual environment that people can use to reach a common understanding and to approach the problem using the same metrics. With the sort of proliferation and distribution of physical test facilities, though, we think it probably does make more sense to have a network where you can have different groups, whether they be government, university, commercial, can address different parts of the problem, because at the end of the day, we are not simply trying to recreate a very simple experiment. We are trying to replicate an entire world that we have limited data about, and that causes some problems. That's a lot for any one person or organization to bite off. Looking at programmatic pathways and barriers, I think we took the approach that rather than placing a hard burden on providers to meet all the different requirements of various technologists, it really makes more sense to do kind of a commercial, if you build it, they will come approach, where different commercial entities can offer what they think is a commercially viable solution to meet the largest set of needs, and then to the extent there are capabilities gaps in between those, that's where NASA can step in and provide funding to subsidize high priority areas that maybe are not as commercially viable by themselves. Looking at legal and liability considerations, there's a bit of an imbalance potentially, particularly on IP when we're talking about larger organizations that have the resources and wherewithal to provide something like an LPG, and making sure that they are not forcing too many smaller companies to kind of hand over the recipe to the special sauce to be able to use that. Additionally, as we look towards international collaboration, making sure that export controls don't get to be too onerous, and certainly we want to align this with the international cooperative regime and sort of interoperability principles that are included in the Artemis Accords. And then looking at the sort of management and funding structure, we actually have a pretty good model for how something like this could work. Through NASA's Flight Opportunities Program right now, we have a pretty straightforward model for how you can allocate resources and funding and prioritize within a testing environment. Now there you have different vendors who provide different types of flight capabilities for flight testing, whether that be parabolic flights, high altitude balloons, rocket landers, suborbital rockets. And then you have sort of a clearinghouse through NASA, through the Flight Opportunities Program, to align on priorities and sort of allocate out who gets funding and grants to go and pursue those. You could do something very similar here where you have qualified providers who provide their own LPGs that test certain aspects. It also handles a little bit of the sort of accreditation requirement that you would have so that you know that we are in consensus that any kind of testing there meets a certain threshold, and that allows the government to kind of dictate what the priorities are, but at the same time the commercial industry to provide that and not put all of the burden on the taxpayer for actual construction of these facilities.
Awesome, thank you. Let's move to group 2. Did I just say group 1? Yes, group 2.
Okay. I'm Tom Walters with Table 2. We had a great group as well, but I'd like to recognize everybody. Everybody I've talked to, it's been great talking with all of you. So, let's see here. So, we talked a lot about a series of facilities to test system of systems whose continuity of data can provide a picture for readiness for the lunar surface. That's going to require a variety of labs, and they're going to be mission specific. One facility will not meet all needs. Should be looked at as a dry run of a mission, and with a range of fidelity. It could also be digital where it's appropriate. Need a set of standards that everybody can work by, but it needs to be ready to be adjusted as needs and technologies change. A technology standards body of government, industry, and academia needs to be formed. Agreement structures need to be flexible and may also be part of a standards discussion. A consortium could organize, should organize with government support to develop a space economy, and this should have already been done. Government, universities, nonprofits, and industry must coordinate priorities where government has the final word to set support development of the space economy, but it's negotiable to within limits, and maybe there could be some standards for where those limits need to be set. So, thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Let's do in-person group 3.
So we had a small but dynamic group. Some of our likes were this facility, whatever it is, needs to be independently run as a nonprofit. The capability should be system developer funded, not technology focused. It needs to be at an upper level. Technology to me is a part, but it needs to be system based. The network facilities, multiple networked facilities over one, with a minimum set of capabilities, kind of a lower standard. You got to have these things at a minimum. And then we also thought that a human, a robotic, and a human-robotic interaction LPGs would be important to have, because those are separate things. What we wondered about was how to coordinate all of the various digital engineering tools that are out there. Which ones should be used? How do we interface between them? You know, there's a hodgepodge. Translating is always a problem. And the question on how soon, I think we need it pre-2030, but how early is what we wondered about. Do we need it tomorrow? Do we need it today? Do we need it 2029, 12/31? But pre-2030, because there's a knee in the curve coming. And thank you for our group and everybody who listened.
All right, perfect, thanks. 4, I lost track. Is it 4? Okay.
Yes, number 4. So in a nutshell, our group talked about a couple of major points. So the first is that our LPG needs to be small and scalable initially, at least to start with, because it's better to have something good today rather than something perfect tomorrow. And then we do the best that we can and then build on it. So it needs to be iterative, that's the main component to being like small and scalable. There are many unknown unknowns, and the more information we know, the more we're able to change and modify. And so if we have it smaller, scalable, we can build upon it and make that happen. Particular barriers and pathways, there needs to be some sort of requirements or certification of testing so that there's like some standardization across like multiple lunar proving grounds. But with that, we need to define what the priorities are and to what fidelity we're going to be testing and having those standards set. And we don't want to be duplicating efforts. So if there are existing facilities, there needs to be some sort of communication between lunar proving grounds or entities so that no effort is duplicated. And it's great, like we want to have a catalog of sorts, so something that LSIC is starting to do, but something that's also like widely available and easy as possible for people to and customers to quantify cost. So that is something that is a need and that needs to be actively contributed to. And what we also need to do is like for users and for people who are interested in using the lunar proving grounds, have explicit constraints and capabilities that each facility has. And then also introducing digital engineering, so virtual characterization of physical systems that interacts with the same fidelity as the physical system, that needs to be well integrated, and potentially model-based systems engineering efforts as well. And that's it.
I've been given the go-ahead to just start on group 5. So we had a very succinct conversation, and it was fantastic. People just kind of listed their demands, and I was like, okay, yes, I'll write it down. So one of the first big topics was on nuclear test facilities, and so I think this has been going to our theme of what is an LPG, and so trying to continue the conversation and not assuming that a lunar proving ground is necessarily a dirty vacuum or, you know, a physical place even. Like, so including everyone in that conversation and everyone who is part of the system of any kind of lunar activity needs to have some sort of proving ground associated with them. So nuclear test facilities was like one of the big topics. And then next on the list was developing a list of definitions. So this kind of goes along with some of the other conversations that have been had, but having succinct definitions of this is what a lunar proving ground is, and making that different from something like this is what a specialized test facility is. You can have test facilities that are for individual pieces of a system, but then having the full Lunar Proving Ground might be a bigger, more involved deal. And going off of that topic, we discussed the systems of systems idea. And so this Lunar Proving Ground is testing everything as it is connected with each other. We can't just be testing individual components and then assume that it'll all work together when it gets up on the moon. And then finally, there was an ask for coordination for testing capabilities and needs. So this has also been talked about by some of the other groups, but having one place where we have a list of everyone's capabilities and users can go and say, these are my needs, and we can match things and send people on their way is what needs to be done. So that was ours.
All right, awesome. Thanks, everyone. Oh, Bob.
Table 6.
There's 10 on in person? I thought there were 5. God.
I can sit down.
I'm sorry. No, please. I was
yeah.
just like prepared to like start talking about things. Yeah, Bob, go ahead. Oh my gosh.
With deference to table 1, best in the known universe. The known universe is actually a subset of the multiverse. So, so we talked a lot about what is the Lunar Proving Ground look like, and it's going to be distributed. There's not going to be a single everything under one roof. That would be great and extremely expensive, and who's going to pay for it? So we see sort of distributed infrastructure. Some testing facilities are going to be needed for a lot of people. Some are not going to be needed by anybody. So emphasis would be on interoperability between the facilities. And that leads into things like the digital engineering tools and linking things together. And we imagined a sort of a hybrid model like what the Missile Defense Agency does, where you've got a very distributed testing capability where some things are hardware in the loop, some things are software in the loop, some things are actual real live tests, some things are virtual tests. And it all works together and through digital means. As far as programmatic pathways and barriers, there was a big concern about regulating yourself or limiting yourself to the point where you can't do anything without everything breaking. So you want to have requirements because you need to test your requirements, but you don't want to have requirements that are so onerous that nobody can pass them, or so onerous that in making yourself pass them, you've run yourself out of business. So a point that came up, it's okay to fail, but do no harm. How do we handle the overlap? There's going to be overlap, and there should be overlap in certain capabilities because there are certain tests that everybody's going to need. That's where we need a lot of overlap. And there are other tests that maybe there isn't a huge drive for, but there is some. So we envision something like a smart booking agents or a clearinghouse where you could go to a one-stop shop and they would tell you, well, these facilities are available, these facilities are not. You can pick between these 10 different companies that do the same kind of testing. Who runs that thing? Well, that's probably where the government would be able to provide programmatic support. Some way to set that clearinghouse up, maybe run the clearinghouse. When do we need it? Well, we're planning already to do the tests. If we're planning to do the test, we need to know where we're going to do the test. So we need it now or earlier, ideally. Who manages, upkeeps, and funds all of these things? Well, in general, because it's a distributed facility, distributed architecture, distributed capabilities, those organizations that have those capabilities are going to be the ones that fund it, maintain it, manage it. And each of those has their own different models. You know, you've got academic models and government models and commercial models, and they're going to have those operating in parallel for each of those facilities. One thing to note, though, is there's going to be pop-up needs for test capabilities that maybe don't exist. For For those sorts of things, you would imagine any of those kinds of facilities could go to the government and say, you need this capability, can you give us some seed money to develop it? And with that seed money, they develop the test capability, and now we have that capability. The concern there is that we have a capability for a limited need. Once the need goes away, what happens to that capability? And then that capability resides at a facility. They stop maintaining it. The next time it's needed, it's broken and sitting in the corner or something. So there's a concern about how you keep that capability once you've developed it. That's all we had. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you. 7. Was there not a table 7?
Best for last.
You were the only person at table 7? No, we moved over to table 8. You moved to table 8. Okay, 8. Oh, like you combined forces with table 8? Is that what you're saying? Was there an 8? Is there table 8?
9.
You combined with someone. You were table 9? Who was table 8? Are you saying there was no 7 or 8? Nobody was at a table 7? What's that?
I think they put on with other tables. What? Oh.
So where's the 7 and 8? You're saying they eliminated 7 and 8 and put those in other places. Okay.
Well, I guess I'll do 9.
Okay. Number 9.
I definitely pretty split. It was like, what? Oh no. We were group 9. I guess the number one thing we said was we want a facility on the moon because that's really the only way to test everything. I definitely think some kind of full service facility would be smart. I do think isolated facilities will be help us along the way, but eventually it needs to be as one-stop shop as you can, and then having that on in different areas, so like East Coast and the West Coast, but have the same standards that people could test in. One of our notes was finding capabilities that synergize and working together, creating and building a network of facilities to be used, but also incorporating the lessons learned and compiling all the information. I think the main goal is we need to build a facility so we can get started with all the testing. Was, I guess, our common thing was let's just build a facility and start working. And then we can figure out making it better later. We also spoke about creating a simulation software or whatever. We know there's a lot of different options like VR versus simulations versus modeling, but let's just say as an umbrella term, a simulator, and it needs to start with what we have and then over time put information when we get experience into the program so it kind of evolves with when we learn or do actual experiments in space. And then eventually it'll become better and better with experience. I think that was pretty much it.
No one from the 7-8 combo bold enough? All right, it's your last chance. I was at table 10, we're the last table, so most of what we've talked about's already been said, so I'll go quick through this. Before we can figure out what facilities we need or what an LPG is, we need to define, understand what components and systems need to be tested in which environments, at what level of fidelity. That's key to figuring out what the heck this all is. Who manages the LPG? It was a big topic that we talked about. We need some sort of a LPG consortium. As many other groups have said, this is the people who decide what the standards are, what is safe. We talked about what, the best analogies out there now to what this consortium might be are. Is this a NASA thing? Is this a independent government agency type thing? Is this analogous to the FAA? Is this analogous to like a board of industry folks that all manage this consortium? What's the best way to do it? Who investigates when something goes wrong? What stops said consortium or said government agency from becoming too bureaucratic and useless? These are all things we need to be thinking about. No answers, lots of questions. That's it.
Okay, well, last chance for someone from 7 and 8 to, yeah, there we go. Okay, good. Okay, good. We want to hear what you think.
Group 8, we lost our moderator to some part of the multiverse, I guess, so he's maybe exists, maybe doesn't. Maybe he was a figment of our imaginations. A couple of things I remember, we talked about the digital twin aspect and how we don't have the great fidelity on modeling, especially the soils. So maybe there would be the opportunity to design a mission to fly that is well instrumented to bring that data back so that we can improve our models. We talked about standards and how they exist very clearly in human-rated spaceflight world and in the aviation world through the FARs or the military flight standards. And is that a good corollary to apply to robotic missions? We were unsure, but it doesn't seem to exist in that world, but it exists very clearly in manned spaceflight and in flight airworthiness. And then we discussed maybe one idea for APL would to be send out a survey to industry of their desired type of test, and then you would get a number associated with each test, and that might help describe at these various Lunar Proving Ground locations what overlap in tests to be performed would be the most efficient. Anybody else from there? Okay. Go teammate.
Okay, thanks everyone. Yeah, those are some incredible takeaways and thoughts and certainly questions that I think still, hopefully in our final session, which is like a takeaways and next steps, we're going to kind of dive into that. But I will say just really briefly before we go off to the break, so there's going to be a 20-minute break. We can start it at 2:55-ish, so if folks can be back in here. I know the program says 3:05, but let's go to 3:15 just so that everyone has that 20-minute break. Oh, yes, right. And so as a reminder, the Slido has a new survey up. So while you're taking your little 20-minute break, feel free to fill that out and just give us some last-minute feedback on kind of how you thought this went. But I really thought the conversations from this open discussion too were really interesting. And I certainly think that, over the past couple days, we have captured hopefully all, but if not all, then most of the, sort of possible options for an LPG. So luckily you have all brought your creativity and your smarts and incredible backgrounds to the table. And I think, now that we have this kind of broad list of things that an LPG could be and things that an LPG could do, despite the fact that, as Michael said, the consensus is that there has not really been a consensus. But I think that's okay, because I think the most important part first is to just define the perimeter of this space. And I think that we have done that today. But anyway, I'm sure we'll get into more of these sort of takeaways and kind of like parting thoughts in our takeaways and next steps. But I kind of just wanted to mention that all of these thoughts and questions that you're all posing are extremely important to start kind of hashing this out and figuring out what exactly we need to do. So I really appreciate each and every one of you. Let's go on break, meet back in here at 3:15, and then we're gonna dive into like, what do we do about this? What's the meat of it? Where do we go from here? All right, thanks everyone.